It started small. So small I could have dismissed it for weeks if it hadn't kept happening in the exact same way. Every single night, my old grandfather clock in the hallway would move its hands forward by 3 minutes between 3 o'clock and 3:03 a.m. Not during the day, not when the house was filled with light and sound, but only after I had gone to bed, after the hallway had gone still. And the thing is, that clock has been broken since I moved in, a family heirloom I inherited from an uncle I barely knew. No working mechanism inside, no ticking, no weights, nothing but air and the echo of something that once kept time. And at first I thought maybe I was imagining it, that maybe my memory of the position was off. Maybe I had bumped it walking past. Maybe some vibration in the old floorboards shifted the hands. But then I took photos, night after night, proof, timestamps, and it kept happening. Exactly 3 minutes forward, never more, never less, and never at any other time. I stopped sleeping. I sat in the hallway with the lights off and my phone recording, camera pointed directly at the face of the clock, trying to catch it in the act. And every night the footage would come back clean. No movement, no sound. But the hands would still be different in the morning, always 3 minutes later than they were the night before. On the 6th night, I tried staying completely still, eyes wide open, breathing slow, no distractions, and around 3:01 a.m. I felt something, not in the room exactly, but in the air, like pressure shifting inside a sealed container. Like the hallway had suddenly become deeper than it should have been, like something had stepped in without moving. And even though I didn't see anything, I felt watched, not with curiosity but with precision, like it had come for that exact moment and nothing else. I checked the footage again. Still nothing. But now the video file was 3 minutes shorter than the length it was supposed to be. I started marking the walls, not just around the clock, but along the floorboards and the door frames too, little pencil lines and numbers noting the time, the date, the precise angle of the clock's hands before I went to bed each night. And every morning I'd come back and find that tiny shift forward, always 3 minutes, never a second more. And each time the marks on the wall were untouched, like nothing had physically disturbed the area, like time itself had gently leaned forward while the world pretended to sleep. And the worst part was, the more I stared at the changes, the more I felt like the clock wasn't just moving, it was watching me react to it. I tried removing the clock from the wall entirely one night, lifted it down and placed it on the kitchen floor, set up 3 cameras at different angles, fully charged and ready to record without interruption. But when I checked the footage the next morning, every camera feed blacked out at 3 a.m. on the dot, stayed dark for exactly 3 minutes, then came back online with the clock now sitting upright on the hallway floor, perfectly centered beneath its original hook, hands exactly 3 minutes forward. I thought about smashing it, about throwing it in the fire pit behind the house, but some instinct, something deeper than fear, told me not to, not because I was scared of what would happen, but because I was afraid I already knew. So instead, I started logging what I dreamed about each night the clock moved, and at first it was nothing, just static, darkness, silence. But around the 9th day, the dream started changing, became clearer, more detailed, like watching a movie in fragments. A hallway that wasn't mine but felt familiar, lined with picture frames full of blurred-out faces, a door at the end slightly ajar with soft yellow light spilling through the crack, and behind that door I could hear ticking, not mechanical, not rhythmic, but biological, like a heartbeat that had learned to mimic the sound of time breaking. I stopped setting alarms. I stopped leaving the house. I started waking up exactly 3 minutes later every morning, 3:03 a.m., no matter when I went to sleep, always alert, always sitting up in bed like something had pulled me to consciousness, and every time I looked at the clock, the hands were already in motion, like I'd caught it red-handed, but it didn't care, like it wanted me to witness the change now. Then, last night, something new happened. I woke up not at 3:03, but at 2:58, earlier than ever before, and as I stepped into the hallway I saw it, not movement, not a shadow, but absence, like the hallway had deepened, stretched into something older than the house itself. And the clock wasn't on the wall, it was standing freely in the middle of the hallway, like it had grown legs or been carried. And the second I stepped closer, the hallway lights cut out completely. And in that instant, I didn't hear ticking. I heard whispering. I didn't run because something in the silence told me it was already too late for that. Not in the sense of danger, but in the way you know the second a dream becomes a memory. The moment it locks itself into your mind with a detail too real to forget. And I stood there in the dark hallway breathing slowly, feeling the cold settle against my skin like the house itself had inhaled and was waiting for me to speak first. and the clock stood silently in the center like it had always belonged there. Tall and still and steady, with its glass panel darkened by something thicker than shadow. And that whispering I heard didn't come from behind the glass or from the gears that weren't supposed to work. It came from the floor, from the wood, from beneath my feet, like voices had been buried in the foundation long before I arrived here. And each whisper was shaped like my name, but distorted slightly. Not malicious, not pleading, just wrong in a way that felt deliberate, like someone was trying to pronounce a word they'd only ever seen written in a dream. And as I reached out toward the clock, hand shaking, I felt something push back, not physically, but in the space between my fingers and the wood, like resistance that came from memory, like the clock knew what I had forgotten and didn't want me to touch it until I remembered. I backed away and turned on every light in the house, moved the clock back to its original place with gloves on like that would matter, like separation was still something I could enforce, and I sat on the couch until sunrise staring at the hallway, half expecting it to stretch again, to open into that too long corridor from my dreams with the door at the end pulsing like a heartbeat behind yellow light. I didn't fall asleep, but I must have closed my eyes, because when I opened them again it was evening and the apartment was silent and the clock was ticking, loudly, rhythmically, as if it had always worked, as if all the broken parts had been restored. And I stepped into the hallway with lead in my legs and dread in my chest, and watched as the hands clicked forward. Just once. Precisely 3 minutes again. Only this time I could see the gears moving behind the glass, intricate and alive, humming with something too precise to be mechanical, and I noticed something even worse. The reflection in the glass didn't match mine. I leaned in slowly, breath held, eyes locked, and the man staring back at me wasn't blinking, wasn't standing the same way, wasn't wearing the same expression. In fact, he wasn't wearing the same clothes. I stepped back. He didn't. I raised my hand. He didn't move. And then, very slowly, he smiled. And the hands on the clock moved again, just 1 minute more. Off schedule. Early. And I realized then that this wasn't just about time moving forward. It was about something on the other side deciding when it was ready to cross over. I didn't leave the house because I knew whatever this was didn't live in the clock. It lived in the time between ticks, in the space between footsteps, in the breath I hadn't taken yet. And walking outside wouldn't help, because whatever had entered through that clock wasn't trapped by walls or windows. It was following my choices, not my location. And as I sat alone at the kitchen table with every light on and the sound of that ticking bleeding through the walls like it was in the drywall now, in the ceiling, in the wiring, I remembered something I hadn't thought about since I was a child. A game I used to play with my cousin in our grandfather's house, the same house where the clock used to hang, where we would dare each other to stay in the hallway after midnight while the clock struck once, then twice. And on the third chime we'd have to whisper our full names into the dark and promise we wouldn't lie before sunrise or else he would remember. And it was just a game, just something we made up to scare ourselves. But I realized now that I didn't remember who taught us that game. And I didn't remember who said the clock used to move on its own. And when I tried to call my cousin to ask, his number was no longer in my contacts. The phone just rang once and then cut to silence. Not voicemail, silence. I walked down the hallway to the clock again, hands shaking, and noticed the hands had jumped another 4 minutes ahead, breaking its own rule, moving without pattern now like it was accelerating towards something. And as I looked into the glass again, the reflection this time was wearing the same clothes I wore the night my uncle died, the night I was alone in the room with him for 3 minutes after the machines flatlined and the nurses hadn't come in yet, the night I whispered something into his ear that I'd never repeated to anyone because I thought it had only been in my head, but the man in the reflection knew, because his lips were moving now, repeating it back to me, syllable for syllable. And I couldn't hear the sound, but I knew the shape of it, and it hit me like a cold needle to the spine because that moment wasn't recorded, that memory wasn't shared, that phrase wasn't written down anywhere. And yet here it was being mouthed back to me by someone who looked like me but wasn't breathing. I turned away from the glass, and for a moment the ticking stopped. The entire hallway went quiet, and then I heard the clock strike once, then twice, and then a third time. And from the far end of the hallway, the door that had never existed began to open slowly, spilling out that same yellow light I had only ever seen in my dreams. I should have run, but I didn't because the moment that yellow light touched my feet, I understood it wasn't trying to pull me in. It had already reached me, already rewritten the hallway beneath my shoes and the walls around my thoughts. Already pushed the entire apartment 3 degrees sideways into a version of itself that had been waiting, patient and exact. And as I stepped closer to the open door, I felt the ticking return, but it wasn't coming from the clock anymore. It was coming from me, deep in my chest where my heart used to beat, perfectly synchronized with each shift of the minute hand that I could still hear clicking even though I hadn't looked at the face in minutes, and the man in the reflection no longer mirrored me. He was standing behind the door now, visible only through the light, smiling the way someone smiles when they've been listening through a keyhole for years and finally hear the words they've been waiting for. And I stepped into the light because there was no turning back, not because I was curious, not because I was brave, but because I already had, because time inside that hallway had begun to loop backward and forward at once, showing me memories I hadn't lived yet and futures I thought I'd escaped. And the clock at the center was no longer measuring seconds, it was selecting them. The hallway behind me closed like a drawer, and I was standing in a room I'd never seen but instantly recognized, filled with clocks of every shape and size, all frozen, all pointed to different times. And in the center of the room was a table with a single object on it, the clock's missing pendulum. The one my uncle always said was lost, not broken. I picked it up, and in the moment I touched the brass, every clock began to tick at once, deafening and perfect, and the man who wore my face stepped out from the wall like he had been part of it the whole time and said nothing. He just held out his hand. And in his palm was a photograph of me sitting at my kitchen table, eyes wide, staring at a clock that hadn't moved yet. I took the photo, and the second I did, he stepped back into the wall and vanished, and the clocks all stopped at once. I woke up in bed at 3:03 a.m. Everything was silent. The hallway was dark. The clock was back on the wall. The hands hadn't moved. But this morning, when I checked my phone, I found a photo I didn't take, sent from an unknown number. It was me, standing in the hallway, smiling. And behind me was a yellow door, slightly open, waiting.